Hello guys, I know you guys have missed me. Yeah, I've been in the pipeworks. If you have been following me on Instagram, you know that I've been alive. There's a lot going on and soon to be shared. But today I just want to share something brief. I hope I make it brief about my first ever animated piece that I worked on, and just to discuss a few things, the way we went about making that particular, shot. So just before we get in, here's the animation.
Hello?
Yo, Queen, what's up?
I'm good. Tell me something. It's Val's Day. What's up?
Oh, Kempinski, moving pig, name it. Why are you taking us, babe?
Parasite. When are you ever going to do something for us? When are you bringing something to the table? I always spend. I always do everything. Gosh! If by noon I don't receive anything, it's over.
To give a background about this particular project, it was an assignment, kind of like an entire semester project that was given to us during our bachelor's in the second year. We had to work on it as groups. So I had my group that I was working in, and others also had their groups. The theme of the assignment was to come up with a commercial piece for any product that we, would opt for as a group. So for my group, what we discussed to go in the line of work was to do something around Kit Kat. I don't know if that is a biscuit or something. Honestly, there was no really deep thoughts about the story. Like, it wasn't like something serious to sit down and write a script. We did have a script, but like the idea of the story was just to make like a skit, so it wasn't too deep in terms of crafting a story. And the direction of the story was decided that, okay, this is what we are going to do. The second thing that we thought on to do was to make the animation kind of something like a Valentine's Day thing. We then moved on to designing characters, just putting ideas on paper. They were already suggested that we are going to work with two characters and have like this rat character also joining. For the character design for the guy, there was a group member who was called Atit Matichubiadem, and we designed the character kind of around him, and so we named that character in the animation Atit. And the fun way we played with that, his name, his character, with the product we were working on, was just to change the kits for tits, so it became tits rat. That kind of just playing of words, just pun. There was something deep. From the discussions, we were like, okay, what next should we do with these ideas? We started putting up our ideas from what we had written in terms of script, kind of like a script, into storyboard. When everything was laid out, in terms of shots, what we're going to do from here to there and all that, we went on to start putting out some designs for the background. Those were the easiest to be done because the backgrounds were things that we had skill to do at the time. We had the know-how to do at the time, so it was the easiest to start with. And I just want to make sure I touch on the base that we had no prior experience to this particular production, this particular animation exercise. The only experience I can point to was that in our first year, this should be second year in our second semester. So in our second year in the first semester, The only thing I can liken to animation, doing this level of animation, was walk cycle animation. That one was an individual exercise that we all did. So that technically was my first experience with 2D animation, to be precise. And moving on from there, we came to the second semester where we did this particular project. So in terms of making that length of a production and, putting the story and narrative, those kind of things to it, this would be, to the best of my knowledge, our first attempt to 2D animation. So we came like with green horns. We didn't have that much of know-how in terms of animation software. It was just green. I'm able to present this because I now have grown over the years and understood all these things, so I can now present it that way. But back then, we didn't really know from what step to go, from where to where. It was new to each and every one of us. I remember thinking, really, that do we also animate the background frame by frame? Like this, it was my first time. It was our first time. So you have all these questions. Another concern that followed was if a shot is going to move from here to here, like the action or the character is going to move from this particular point of the scene to here, how do the shots come together? How do we piece the shots together? You have all these questions, and I'm sure those who are interested in animation also have these kind of questions that they do think about. I happen to be the group leader for my group and the product that we are working on. And we had a blend of different people, different level of skills in our group. We all had different styles of illustrations in the group. There were guys in the group that were more specialized in vector animation or vector illustration, while others were more like the traditional drawings and all that. So how do we work together? And so by way of making the project engaging, collaborative, I had to disseminate the parts of the project to different personalities within the group. So what I ended up doing was like I evaluated in a way fairly, to the best of my knowledge, those who had some level of skill in drawing, those who have some level of skill in doing A, B, and C, then looking at the project that we had at hand and seeing where to push each and every one. I eventually ended up working solely on the main character, which is the lady that began the whole scene. And I ended up delegating other aspects like the fight sequence and all that. I delegated that to Theophilus. The backgrounds, I remember it was Nielsen that worked more on it. Barbara was on it. She supported us like in terms of organization, research, documentation, story, script, that kind of thing. Barbara was exceptional, with story. She read a lot and all those things. So then there was Nana Kofi, who was already abreast with After Effects, had knowledge in Cinema 4D. So it was just, it was basically like look at what everyone could do and just push the work in those directions. We started with what we had. We started with who we had on board. We started with the knowledge that we had. The best software that we knew how to handle at the time was Photoshop. So the animation process started with Photoshop. I didn't have a graphic tablet at that time, so it was Barbara's tablet that we were using. Nana Kofi also had a tablet, so it was like 2 tablets to the whole team. So you could imagine how limited we were with our production pace. And if you are interested in animation and want to get into it, don't be so much saddled with getting the equipment, getting a display tablet, a Cintiq before you start. Now start with what you have, really. So how did I start animating? The way I started animating in this particular instance as my first, try on animation was that I used a lot of reference. The animation began with a lady on a phone call talking with this her boyfriend. I went on YouTube, searched for animations that had phone call scenes in. I downloaded it, brought it to Photoshop, rendered it out as JPEG sequences, and used that like a rotoscope principle. What I mean by rotoscoping is having a reference that you draw over it, kind of like word for word or frame by frame in a way. So that's what I did to start my animation journey with. When I was done with that, I then had the liberty to be able to adjust a lot of things. So the advantage of doing that, as my first experience in animation, was to do away with the what ifs, the hurdles that possibly I could have faced head on. It would have been a lot. Actually, now that I think of it, majority of the production was heavily dependent on references. Still on the phone call scene, the lady had to make a reaction. I needed a reference also for that. I found another video reference of Cruella from Disney, where she also was on a phone call and she had this kind of expression that she did. Was it Cruella? Cruella was on the phone call with another lady. I've forgotten the name of the character in that particular popular production. I had that particular video downloaded, rotoscoped exactly what happened and built on it. There were parts that we could not get, so we had to video a group member of us, Josephine, who acted that way, like what we wanted to capture. There was a challenge to that. Josephine, at the point, she was beautifully slender at the time, and our character, on the other hand, had a bit of weight on. So how do you make these two references match? What I did, like I mentioned already, just rotoscoped the video reference, and from there began to add flesh. What I realized with rotoscope was that if I rotoscoped the reference frame by frame, the animation ends up looking like a video that had an animation filter on, but that was not the feel that I was going for. When you're doing a rotoscope, you don't necessarily need to do every frame by frame. Sometimes you could skip frames, maybe 6 frames or 12 frames. Given that skip in the rotoscoping process helps you to achieve a look or a feel of animation that is a bit organic for 2D animation. It doesn't look so real, it doesn't look so smooth. There was this scene which is like the fun scene in this production, the fight scene. I delegated that side entirely to Theophilus, and he did an amazing. I was really happy when he came with the result, and I was like, that's it. The only thing that we had to work on was that Theophilus had a different, drawing style than I, and it was my style that we used to do the design of the characters. So in the end, what we had to do was that he did kind of like the rough animation of that whole fight sequence, and I later came on to add the features of the characters to make them look like we had in the character design. The fight sequence, the backgrounds weren't done for that aspect, so I had to figure out how to do that. And that was more so because for the fight sequence, there were a lot of movements in the camera angles, and here was I trying to think, so how do I go about it? Do I create a big background and pan it with the camera movement and all that? I later found out that that wasn't going to help. So what I had to do was that with each camera angle change, I had to create, a different background for that. With each change in the camera angle, there was a different background that I had to make identical to the previous backgrounds of the same element. It was tedious. It was tedious, but yeah, we were able to pull through on all of that and ended up having the result that we see. We also had channels that we watched. I particularly was so much invested in Howard Wimstad and also Olaf Storm at the time, sometimes also Jazza. Howard is able to tell stories from very short animations that were not so clean. They were not these kind of polished animations, but you could tell the life at work in what he animated. You could tell the story. It was beautiful. There was also this particular short film that I also found online about this kind of apocalypse of coffee, and I just so was in love with that particular production. It was short. The story was just complete on its own, though it was short, and that was one of the things that I was driving at the time, that we achieve as a group on this production, that we will be able to tell something though short but was complete in essence. But yeah, we soon found out that our capacity at that time was not built up for that level of storytelling yet. Things that happened along the way that got us excited, that gingered us up to, pushing, like it was like a sign that, yeah, this thing really seemed to be working. So one of them was that in the beginning of the animation, we start from a room and we dolly in through the room to the window, then we cut to the lady on the phone outside. And what I wanted to do with that particular dollying in, it was going to be like a zooming in. So what I did not want us to do was that I didn't want us to have an image that was just zoomed into the screen like that. What we needed to do was to have a zoom in that felt like a walkthrough. That means that the elements in the room, we should feel that kind of transition as we pass them by towards the window. I remember I delegated Nana Kofi to research on that because he was good with After Effects and had experience in things that were related towards that. At times he brought what he did, it was like, yeah. Eventually he came through, he pulled through with that. And I remember the first time I saw it, he showed it to us and I was like, yeah, this this is it. That was one of our initial breakthroughs that got us really excited. There was a portion of the animation where we had to have the other character, the guy, on a motorcycle, riding across the screen. What he did on that particular shot, in terms of traditional frame-by-frame animation, was the flapping of the shirt. But when it came to the rotation of the tires of the motorcycle, the movement across, he did all of that in After Effects, added a motion blur, added some lighting, and when he showed it to us, that I was like, whoa, this is beginning to look like, the animations that you see on TV. And so those were the things that were kind of exciting, was gingering us to, get on, like, it is working, it's coming together. Post-production was an interesting moment as well. I thought, from my perspective, if you're done with the animation, that's it. Like what you do, the rough animation, that's it, and you add colors to it. Because of that perception that I had of animation at the time, when I did the rough animation, I was confused to why it didn't look like the kind of animations I'm seeing on the screen. Later on, I got to find out that, after the rough animation, you have to do cleanup. So the cleaning up is where, the stroke and the line works are done, hence making it look like what we see on the TV screen. So when it came to compositing, as of this time, there was literally no one around, except Edmond was still around. Yeah, Edmond was one of our group members who was very supportive in the whole process. He was very instrumental at the end. Not everyone would play a role at each stage of the animation process. So during pre-production, it wasn't necessary that everyone participated during pre-production. During production, it's not necessarily everyone that gets to participate during production. Although it is very helpful and handy to have a number of people, like in terms of production, the number of people you have on the workforce, the better, and everyone comes in at different points of the production. Also had another group. He was not an original group member, part of our group. He was from another group. They were done with theirs and he decided to lend me a hand. Kenneth Brown, he was amazing. He has a background in video production, so he had the knowledge of all effects and all these things that were needful in our compositing process. I was having an issue making the lighting effect that I wanted to achieve for the production, translate in After Effects. The issue was that bringing that style into After Effects, the blending moods were not blending. It was, kind of awkward. So Kenneth brought this idea of, using green screen. I knew of green screen, but I didn't think that you could work it out creatively. So what we ended up doing was that I separated the lighting effects and created a green background, green screen behind it. and then imported that into After Effects. Then using the chroma key thing, was able to key out the green element from that whole composition, and there we're able to retain that effect. I had some drawbacks on this whole process as well. The fact that we had to figure out everything on ourselves, and this was like our first time. It had an effect on me, because if you understand the enthusiasm that I came on board animation with, I was expecting that we would have this kind of assistance, that we are going to we're going to be guided in a way of step by step what to do, and all these things, like going through the whole process of animation and not necessarily being left to figure it out. There's nothing bad about that, but it was just that my expectation at that time, I can't speak for others, but my expectation at that time and the reality on ground were so apart. One thing that looking back, I would have done differently was not to be so constrained and so to be particular about certain requirements, certain specifications, if I should say. I was so obsessed about the strokes, the feel, the look. Like it was our first time, so the focus should have been to just have fun with the production. I had so much of a high expectation for what we were to achieve. Obviously, coming from the background that I come from, and many others having watched anime, a lot of animation works, you come to the table with a certain level of expectation that you want to achieve. Is both good and kind of a bit also disadvantaging, in that having that level of expectation is able to bring the quality of the production to that point where it's very, very good and it's not subpar. But then on the flip side, what that does is that when you are not able to meet that expectation, it makes you a bit disappointed in the results that you end up having, and such was my case. I experienced both. On one side, we're able to achieve this production at this quality for our first time animating, but on the flip side, I wasn't so enthused about the results because it didn't meet what I had in mind, particularly with elements like the storyline, the narrative of the production. I watched it back and I was like, the sound element, the sound design, the phone call part and all those things, you could tell that the sound, was just slapped on. It didn't feel like it was part of the animation. And so like that, those kind of disparities were some of the things that made me cringe after the production was done. When looking back at the production, I was like, at the end of it all, I came to the point where I understood that at that point, that was the capacity that we had. We were able to work to the best of our capacity. We couldn't have done better. That was our best. That up until then, up until that point, that was the level at which we could produce. And I had to come to the point where I recognized that. But overall, I mean, looking back at it, I was like, yeah, we rocked. When you are trying out animation for your first time, don't nail yourself to so much of a high expectation. Just have fun. Don't try to get something so polished, so clean. Make something move on the screen. If there are things you would like me to double down on, some things I touched on that you would like me to explain better, let me know in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.